Hi, welcome to the sideboard here at Grand Prix Atlanta. I'm Nick Miller alongside Seth, Manfield, and Ari Lax. Good to have you guys here in the sideboard.
Yeah, great to be here. Star City Grand Prix are always the best.
Probably the first time I've had the world champion and a Pro Tour champion next to me here in the booth, so it's a pretty big deal.
You never had John Finkel? He was both.
Not in this booth.
Fair enough.
Technically correct, the best kind of correct.
Yes.
But we're talking Battle for Zendikar Limited. Day one is sealed. We want to know what this format is all about. What are you looking for? What are you looking to not do?
So I'm looking the blue cards. I think blue is the consensus best color. So obviously it's nice to open your rares, your mythics, which I was lucky enough to do. But even if you don't open great rares or mythics, maybe you have one or two rares that you can play. It all starts with the commons, and I think that the blue commons are the best. The other thing that I don't think most people think about is there's a lot of non-basic lands in this format. You don't actually want a lot of non-basic lands in your pool because they don't do that much. Maybe maybe you play one or two and they have a slight impact on the game, but you'd rather have more actual cards to add up towards your playable count. Say you're going for 22 or 23 playables, and so a lot of those non-basic lands are common.
So I agree with you on the point about not needing the rares. Like a couple rares is nice. It's always nice to have free wins, but you don't need them. The cards are powerful enough in the way they add up in this format. I agree that blue is the best color, but I think that you'll notice if you start looking at the pools that win a bunch that the concentration of removal is really important. And as a result, the really top-end pools end up playing a lot of white because white has Smite the Monstrous, Sheer Drop, and Gideon's Reproach at common, Royal's Retribution, and Stasis Snare at uncommon. So white actually is like the highest quality level of removal, which is kind of weird and interesting, but it's like a level up from black, which I think is a little underrated because Bone Splinters is still fine. But so, you'll try to get one of those colors in. Blue is usually like a good base, but you need to notice that you need removal. And the other thing is I actually like playing. You don't want to open a lot of non-basic lands because if you do, you don't have commons or playable spells. But the ones you open, you're going to want to play a lot of them. Just like the bonus effect is pretty important. There's not a lot of card draw. It's kind of easy to flood out in this format. The seal stuff just trades a bunch. You need to hit high drops. So if you have, like a Looming Spires or something, it's kind of great.
Are you guys in the ballpark of wanting to play some of those lands just because the decks seem to be playing a lot more lands in this format?
Yeah, decks in this format are like 18, 19,
Yeah,
a few 17s, but mostly 18, 19.
18 is basically the mean. This is one of the higher density of lands. Just with all the landfall cards, awaken cards, you just want to hit every land drop. There's also Eldrazi's, which are very expensive. And sealed is traditionally slower. I do agree with you, Ari, about removal being important in sealed. As compared to draft, maybe a card like a 5-mana removal spell like Stone Fury, maybe you don't want a bunch of them, or Demon's Grasp, you don't want a bunch of them in your deck. But here, they normally just always find a way into the deck somehow. Just being able to kill an opposing bomb is nice. Even something like Scour the Existence, which is a 7-mana removal spell, is much more playable, I think, in sealed. It deals with the Planeswalker.
That's a card I've been telling people to put, like I've been looking at people's sealed pools, I'm like, why aren't you playing Scour? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, your deck can like reliably go up to, a bunch of mana. You've got like Scions and all this stuff, or like a Channeler. Like the Scour should just be in your deck at that point. Yeah.
What's the real consistency on green? We've heard a lot of people just slam it immediately. I saw a couple people build their seal pools this morning, just almost immediately dismiss the color, with a glance. Is it really as bad as people say?
So I've heard people say have a lot of negativity towards the color. That may be more draft focused. Personally, in sealed, I'm just going to play whatever the pool dictates. And if there's a ton of green cards, there are good green cards that exist. I'm willing to play them. I personally love Landfall, so like a Snapping Gnarlid type creature, whether it's draft or sealed. I played red-green Landfall at the last Pro Tour, so it's very playable. The other great thing about green is that it fits well into a 3 or even 4 color deck because there's the rampant growth, and you could also, a lot of times you have Evolving Wilds in the deck, which works well with the landfall creatures as well. So, I think it's the least popular color, but I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be.
I think the segue is exactly
that's pretty accurate. I think that at first people were drafting it as if it was on par with the other colors, and when it's spread like that and people, it's kind of intricate, it's kind of hard to like have a green deck that worked, and people are just like, it's better to just not play green because you're going to lose with it. But I think in practice, the color's fine. There's like a few specific cards that are really going to push you that way. Omnath, Tajiri Warcaller, Woodland Wanderer are the three that immediately come to mind. A few other cards that will like be like, oh, I've got a Brood Monitor or a Nisa's Renewal. I can do something really interesting with this deck. Or like multiple Eyeless Watchers. So there's cards and synergies you can build to. But if your green's just a bunch of creatures and no removal, if you don't need that kind of effect in your deck, you may just throw it out completely and not consider playing it. It's sealed. You always end up throwing out a color or two. It's going to be green more often than the other colors in this format, but if you're playing green, it's not the end of the world. The color's still fun.
Yeah, your deck today has got a bunch of colors in it, and you kind of got green gluing it together. So
that was the multiple Eyeless Watcher. I'm actually splashing in my deck for 2 Eyeless Watchers, a Brood Butcher, and a Sylvan Scrying. Yes, splashing for Sylvan Scrying because I can Sylvan Scrying for my black-red duel and my base blue-green deck, and everything works.
All right, so shifting the focus to draft here, what is the huge difference between when you can actually move into draft in this format and sealed? You guys have done a lot more draft, for the Pro Tour and that kind of stuff. What are you looking for in the draft format?
So for draft, there's more very specific archetypes that you can be in. Like a deck like a Devoid deck in sealed is much more difficult to have, just because it's unlikely that you're going to have say so many colorless cards in 2 colors in sealed. But if you're moving in that direction in draft, you can get it. Same with like a deck like Allies. Like for sealed, you may have like 5 or 6 allies in your deck, but it's pretty unlikely that you're a dedicated ally deck in sealed. Of course, it's still possible. It's just that much more unlikely. In booster draft, there's 24 packs open at the table, so compared to 6 for sealed, and you're not going to be fighting with that many people over your archetype. Maybe one other person at the table. So. Yeah, I think traditionally there's more specific archetypes for drafting.
Yeah, if you're the person that wants that, Blood Bond Vampire or whatever, you're gonna get it in draft most of the time. Or like one of the ones that I like is like Ally Encampment. That's a card that's gonna come around to you if you're an Allies. And in that format, it's definitely more about, you're not like, I mentioned sheer, like in sealed, I'm like, oh my gosh, I opened a sheer drop, this is great. In draft, it's like, I opened a sheer drop, but I kind of want to take this Nettle Drone instead, because the payoff of being a Nettle Drone deck is usually pretty high, and like just having a sheer drop's fine, but like when your Nettle Drone deck is great, it is great.
What are your particular favorite archetypes? One for each of you guys.
My personal favorite is actually the 4-color green deck, but I know that's not the best archetype. It's just one of my favorites. A deck like blue-red or blue-black, I do believe that those are the strongest archetypes.
Yeah, I've had the most fun playing with decks with multiple Molten Nursery. I specifically remember in our Pro Tour testing house having a deck that had a lovely 5 swamp, 5 mountain, 8 island mana base, where I just was literally just splashing for 4 Molten Nurseries. And there was a game where I had all 4 in play, and my opponent was just like, do my cards have more than 4 toughness? No. So I just play a spell, and then you play a spell, and my spell dies. Your deck's all Shriek Mauls, I lose.
Yep.
Yes, that is exactly how that works. So like, I always have fun with like the really weird archetypes like that. For example, like this last week in the videos I put up, I drafted black-red allies. Not people like black-red Devoid. I was triple Colostra Healer, Night Watches, Ondu Champion, Fire Mantle Mage, ally aggro with like outnumber because I'm low to the ground. You can do a lot of really sweet things if you just keep like, if you look at your cards at like. And not necessarily archetypes, but like there's a lot of weird, subtle synergies in this format that you can kind of like construct an idea of what you want once you know all the cards, and be like, this is what I'm going to build to, this is how it's going to happen. And then you get there and you're like, this is great.
Right. Now, one last question here. What are you looking for? What are your top picks in draft, and what are some underrated cards that people aren't looking for?
So, as I said earlier about sealed, I do like blue commons a lot. So something like Eldrazi Sky Spawner I think is great. I also like cards like Exert Influence. I mentioned earlier about the 4-color decks. I've had that in our team drafts even go around super late because people they're just playing 2 colors, but because it's unlikely, most draft decks are just straight 2 colors, but like the multicolor cards are very good, and so if you can pick up like an Exert Influence late even, I actually, the most underrated card for me is Evolving Wilds. I've actually first picked that card just because it's great in the landfall deck and it allows you to splash your super high power cards. So that card kind of goes under the radar a little bit.
What about you, Ari?
Yeah, so I'm with you. Like Sky Spawner's off the charts. Evolving Wilds is underrated and very high pickable because you can splash a lot of powerful stuff in the format. There's not a common I'd rather first pick than Sky Spawner. Uncommon, it's like Grip of Desolation or Rolling Thunder are like the two best. In terms of underrated, I'm like Misa's Renewal is one of my favorite cards in the format. When you resolve that card, busted things just happen. It really busted stuff. So that's like one of them, and I think there's like a statistics article out that a card that was really underrated that like blew me away was that Colostria Night Watch.
Yep.
Like if you discount the cards that are like, if I cast this card, my opponent dies, like Inspired Charge, which in this stat, like you win 70% of the games you cast it, and you lose 100% of the games where it sits in your hand and does nothing. Colostria Night Watch is just like a 5-drop, and it won like 58% of the games someone played it, which is like a percent or two behind Sky Spawner, which is by far the best common. So you look at it and it's like, how is this 4/5 good? And you're like, oh wait, it's just common air elemental. There's 2 common air elementals in this set. Who thought this was like a thing? And you just play Night Watch and you just hit them for 4 over and over. And similarly, like there's cards like Wavewing Elemental and like Cloud Manta that people are like really high on these synergies. But realistically, big flyers are good and limited. So those are cards that like you could just play and kill your opponent with.
Take it from 2 champions. Flyers are good and limited.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to forget about the commons for a second, I do have an Ulamog and Sealed, and I wouldn't mind first picking that and just going big Eldrazi's, but it doesn't happen every time. So.
Sometimes you get to live the dream.
Yeah.
The stat again, Ulamog is 95% to win the game if it is put onto the stack.
All right, some good advice for you there, Ari, Seth. Thanks for joining me here on the sideboard. Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all weekend long for the action here in Atlanta.